The letter was short, angry, and terrifying. It was written inside a U.S. prison by a man already serving time for terrorism-related crimes. The message was not about regret or change. It was a plan. Guards found it hidden inside a legal folder during a late-night cell search. The words talked about targets, loyalty, and revenge. Even worse, the letter was not meant for someone in prison. It was meant for the outside world. Within hours, the FBI was alerted. Phones inside the prison were shut down. Visits were canceled. Inmates were locked in their cells. Federal agents rushed in, fearing that something bigger was already moving. Officials believed the writer was not alone. He had been talking, he had been recruiting, and he may have already passed instructions to people who were free. If the plan was already in motion, stopping it might be too late. That fear is what keeps prison officials awake at night. This was not the first time U.S. authorities had faced the threat of terrorism plots coming from behind bars. While prisons are not the main place where terror groups are formed, real cases have shown that dangerous ideas can spread in quiet corners of locked facilities. Sometimes, one voice is enough. Years earlier, the man who wrote the letter entered prison angry and isolated. He felt forgotten. That feeling made him easy to influence. Other inmates listened to him because he spoke with confidence. He used simple words. He spoke about injustice, pain, and revenge. To some prisoners, his words felt powerful. At first, the talks happened during recreation time, then during meals, then through notes passed between cells. Guards did not notice at first. Nothing seemed violent, no weapons, no fights, just words. But words can be weapons. Federal investigators later confirmed that similar cases had happened before. In one real event, inmates connected to extremist groups used prison time to spread radical ideas. In another, an inmate tried to inspire attacks after his release by staying in contact with followers through letters and coded messages. These cases alarmed U.S. authorities. The FBI and the Bureau of Prisons began working together more closely. They trained guards to spot warning signs. They monitored mail. They tracked phone calls. Still, the risk remained. Prisons are full of people searching for meaning. Extremist ideas often promise purpose. The inmate at the center of this case knew that. He spoke calmly. He avoided open threats. He never used obvious words like bomb or attack. Instead, he talked about answers and action. Investigators later said this was done on purpose. He wanted to stay hidden. Then came the mistake. A new guard noticed a pattern in his letters. Certain words repeated. Certain phrases showed up again and again. The guard reported it. Analysts reviewed the messages. What they found was chilling. The letters were not random. They were instructions. Outside the prison, federal agents quietly began surveillance. They tracked people who received the letters. Some had criminal records, others did not. One person had recently bought items that raised concern. Another had suddenly quit his job. Inside the prison, tension spread. Inmates whispered about lockdowns and federal agents. Some feared they would be blamed. Others worried the plan would fail. Guards increased patrols. Every sound echoed louder than usual. Every door slam felt final. Interrogators tried again with the inmate. This time, they showed him the intercepted message with the date circled in red. They asked who was involved. He leaned back and stayed silent. Then he smiled. "You can't lock up ideas," he said. That sentence stayed with the investigators. Experts later explained that this is what makes prison-based radicalization so dangerous. Even when violence is stopped, the ideas can travel. They move through letters, visits, and released inmates. One person inside can influence many people outside. That is why the FBI takes even small signs seriously. In a real case years earlier, a U.S. inmate convicted of terrorism had tried to inspire attacks from behind bars. His plans failed, but only after intense monitoring. That lesson shaped how agents handled this case. They treated every hour as critical. Back outside, agents followed the released inmate to a meeting spot. He was not alone. 2 other men arrived separately. They did not hug. They did not talk much. They just nodded. That worried agents even more. The men split up after a short meeting. One headed towards a crowded area. Command came quickly. Agents moved in. The arrest was fast and quiet. No shots fired. No public scene. Inside the car, agents found written notes that matched the inmates' letters. The date was circled again. The target was vague, but real enough to cause fear. The threat was stopped, but the story did not end there. Back in prison, officials searched cells again. They found more notes, more names, some crossed out, some not. The network was bigger than first believed. It had not formed overnight. It had grown slowly, hidden by routine and silence. Corrections officials realized something painful. This was not a single failure. It was a warning. Even with strong security, prisons are still places where ideas meet people at their weakest. Extremist thinking feeds on anger and isolation. Without careful monitoring, those ideas can turn into action. As news of the arrests spread among federal agencies, new questions surfaced. How many other inmates were trying the same thing? How many messages had already slipped through? And how close had the country come to tragedy this time? Inside his isolation cell, the inmate finally spoke again. This time, his voice was calm. "You stopped this one," he said, "but others are listening." Those words echoed long after the cell door closed.
And they raised a terrifying possibility that the next plot might already be forming. Somewhere no one was looking. The warning came too late in the night to ignore. Just days after the arrests, another prison reported something disturbing. A guard had overheard inmates whispering during cleanup duty. They stopped talking the moment he walked closer. One of the names mentioned was already known to the FBI. The same name appeared in the letters from the earlier case. That meant the threat was not over. Federal agents rushed to connect the dots. The inmate in isolation had not acted alone. He was part of a loose network spread across multiple prisons. They did not all know each other. They did not meet in groups. That was the danger. The network had no clear leader, no single plan. It was built on shared anger and belief, and that made it harder to stop. In the past, real cases had shown this pattern before. Inmates convicted of violent extremism sometimes used prison time to strengthen their beliefs. Instead of changing them, they shared stories. They exaggerated past events. They painted violence as justice. Slowly, others listened, not because they wanted terror, but because they wanted meaning. Corrections officials now faced a serious problem. Locking inmates in isolation could stop communication, but only for a while. Transfers helped, but ideas traveled faster than people. Even simple conversations in a hallway could plant seeds. The FBI expanded its response. Mail reviews increased nationwide. Phone calls were limited for high-risk inmates. Prison staff received emergency training to spot coded language and behavior changes. Chaplains and counselors were also brought in, not to punish, but to counter the message, because punishment alone was not enough. Inside one prison, an inmate broke down during questioning. He said he never planned violence. He only listened because the words made him feel important. Investigators had heard that before. It showed how easily influence worked in closed spaces. Still, the risk remained real. In another true event from the United States, an inmate once tried to coordinate attacks after release by keeping contact with followers inside prison. Authorities stopped it, but only after years of monitoring. That case proved one thing clearly: time helps extremists if no one is watching. Back in the current investigation, agents discovered something new. One inmate had tried to pass instructions during a family visit using harmless-looking drawings. Another had memorized phone numbers instead of writing them down. These were small actions, but together they showed planning. Every discovery raised the pressure. Officials now had to ask a hard question: how do you stop a threat that doesn't look like one yet. Prison leaders admitted that U.S. prisons are not major factories for terrorism. Most inmates want to finish their time and go home, but when isolated cases appear, the impact can be deadly if ignored. That is why partnerships between correction systems and the FBI exist, and that partnership was now under a full test. Late one evening, analysts flagged a new call. The voice was calm, the words were simple, but the timing was wrong. The inmate spoke about patience, about waiting, about next time. The call ended before agents could trace everything. Silence followed. No attack happened, no explosion, no headlines the next morning. To the public, it looked like nothing had happened at all. But inside federal offices, no one relaxed. They knew silence did not mean safety. Sometimes it meant preparation. The inmate who started it all was moved again, this time to a higher security facility. Contact with others was cut off almost completely. Still, officials understood the truth. This threat would never fully disappear. As long as prisons exist, as long as anger exists, someone will try to turn time behind bars into something dangerous. That is why counter-radicalization programs now exist inside U.S. facilities, not just to watch inmates, but to give them a reason not to listen. In the end, no terror attack happened in this case, but experts say that does not mean the system won. It means the system barely held, and somewhere in another prison, another inmate may already be speaking in a quiet voice, testing who is listening, because the most dangerous threat is not the one that explodes. It was the one that waits. The final alert came without warning. In the early hours of the morning, a prison intelligence officer noticed something strange. A high-risk inmate, recently transferred because of extremist concerns, had suddenly changed his behavior. He stopped talking to everyone. He stopped attending programs. He sat quietly, watching guards, watching routines. That silence was louder than shouting. Investigators knew from real past cases that this kind of change often came before action. When extremists stop speaking, it can mean they believe their work is already done. That thought sent a wave of urgency through federal agencies. The FBI moved fast again. This time, they looked beyond one prison or one inmate. They reviewed years of old cases, letters, phone calls, and reports. What they found was uncomfortable. There was no single terror group inside U.S. prisons. There was no secret army, but there were moments, small, dangerous moments, when the wrong person influenced the wrong listener, and that was enough.
One real case confirmed it years earlier when an inmate released from prison tried to act on ideas learned behind bars. Authorities stopped him before anyone was hurt, but only because someone noticed early signs. That lesson now guided every move. Inside the current prison, guards increased checks again. The quiet inmate was searched. Nothing illegal was found. No notes, no drawings, no letters. But investigators knew better than to relax. They questioned him anyway. This time, he spoke. He said he felt watched. He said prison made people angry. He said ideas could not be erased, only delayed. His words were calm, but his eyes were focused. Officials noted everything. Nothing happened that day. Nothing happened the next day either. Weeks passed, then months. Slowly, the pressure eased, the network faded. Inmates were released, transferred, or separated. Some joined counseling programs. Others simply served their time and left quietly. On paper, the threat was over. But inside federal agencies, the case was never closed. Corrections officials used what they learned to change procedures. New training programs were added. Staff learned how extremist thinking works, how it spreads, and how it hides. The goal was no longer just punishment, it was prevention. Because once an idea leaves prison walls, it is much harder to stop. Experts agree on one thing. U.S. prisons are not breeding grounds for terrorism in general. Most inmates never touch extremist ideas, but isolated cases prove that even one voice, if ignored, can grow into something dangerous. That is why every letter matters, every phone call matters, every silence matters. The inmate who first wrote the letter remains locked away. He no longer has an audience, but investigators know someone else may take his place someday. Not louder, not angrier, just quieter, smarter.
And that is what makes the threat so hard to see. To the public, prisons look sealed off from the world. Tall fences, steel doors, locked cells. But ideas do not respect walls. They travel with people, with words, with time. The threat of terrorism plots from inmate networks is not about how often it happens. It is about what happens if no one is watching. And tonight, somewhere inside a prison, someone may be testing a sentence, a phrase, a belief, waiting to see who listens. Because the most dangerous plan is not the one that fails, it is the one that has not been discovered yet. If this story made you uneasy, that means it mattered. These threats don't always explode. They hide, wait, and grow in silence. Subscribe now so you don't miss the real stories most people never hear. Because the next warning sign might already be happening right now.